It's a new year, and that means it's time to reflect on the year that has now left us. Yeah, I had 2 different ideas for New Year's videos, and I wanted to do them both. Sue me. Anyways, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to reminisce about the time before I fell down the stairs and hurt my back. It's almost like I'm not in pain. Alright, for this second New Year's video, I want to take a look at all the archetypes that came out this year and talk about my favorites. And to make it easy, let's do it in a nice little top 10 list. Here's my top 10 favorite archetypes of 2024. Honorable mention, Allure Queen. Even after the recent support, Allure Queen only barely feels like an archetype. Like, sure it is one, but only just barely. It's a shame too, since the new cards are really cool and interesting. I like them quite a lot. They interact in a different way than a lot of other decks. It's quite interesting. Since they're from Vrains, they actually took the time to design them in a way where they might actually be playable. And if they ever get another wave of support, they may well become playable. Alas, the further away we get from the release of these cards, the less likely it seems that we'll get more cards for them. It kinda seems like they just wanted to finally print these cards from the anime and move on, rather than develop the deck into something that people might actually have success with at tournaments. With how many cards Konami releases every year, surely they don't have the time to fully test every one. Maybe with some they just determine that they won't break the game and then that's good enough for them. No thought was given into making every card something people might actually like to play, just rushing out cards from the anime to complete the quota of cardboard in every set. I was so hopeful when I first saw these cards, but then they were just relegated to being nothing. Oh well, maybe next year we'll get some. Or maybe we'll get some in 5 years when it's too late to help them, like Dragon Maids. Or maybe we'll never get some. Maybe they just forget about them like a dozen other archetypes. We'll just have to wait and see. Number 10. Fighting Flame Swordsman. So this one also hurts in a similar way, but since they made them from scratch, they were able to actually make them a lot more impressive. Still bad though, don't worry. God, I wanted these to be good. I made a video about them even. The deck has a big guy with a powerful attack stat who can end the game quickly, and some pretty decent control cards to give you the space to do that. I feel like the biggest issue with these cards is that while they're powerful, the power is spread between too many cards. The traps don't do quite enough, the boss monster doesn't do quite enough, and while the deck has good consistency, the extenders don't do quite enough. So if you get interrupted, you're fucked. Basically, it's like Gate Guardian, but more consistent, and more splashable. I think the bones of the deck were really interesting, but unfortunately they just didn't give it any more support except for a brief crossover with the number 9 slot. Number 9. Metalmorph. So Metalmorph was also gifted an archetype in retrospect through a series of retrains, although these cards don't force you to play the old version at all, which is part of why they're better. While the archetype hasn't really made it as a deck so far, these cards are so generic that people have isolated a very concise package to be slotted into a variety of decks like Branded, and most notably, Dragon Link. Just getting Red Eye's Full Metal Dragon on board is a powerhouse worth adding a couple cards to your deck. That's pretty dang impressive for a DM retrain, even if the rest of the cards kinda got the shaft. That includes that second wave crossover with Flame Swordsman. We haven't gotten that over here yet, but it hasn't done anything in the OCG, and I highly doubt it'll do anything here. Being only 2 cards and trying to support 2 archetypes at once has doomed it to failure. But luckily, Metalmorph by itself does get to flex being the most playable DM archetype until the new Blue Eye structure deck, and maybe even after that. Number 8. Ryu-ge. So you might not remember the 3rd best deck from Crossover Breakers because of how impactful the other 2 are, but Ryu-ge actually has a lot of interesting applications, both as a splashable deck core and as a tiny little engine for Dino to get some extra endboard pieces. While the deck isn't as powerful as its friends, it's genuinely not awful and could do some really fun things in combination with other archetypes. I was pretty skeptical of these cards at first, but MBT's video on them really made me think better of them. The interactions with Sword Soul in particular look like a fun new future for the deck. I'm hopeful for these guys if we get the upcoming waves of support. There's a lot of potential here, especially for Worm and Dino enjoyers. Sorry, Sea Serpent fans, I don't think this one is going to be quite enough for you. Number 7. Ashen. This is in basically the exact same position as Flame Swordsman, but I think the playstyle is more interesting and it's an original concept instead of yet another DM retrain, so I like it a lot more even though I'm a bit more disappointed in it. I made a video about it too, and you can really feel my frustration with the deck in that one. That frustration comes from my hopes being crushed into tiny little pieces. Ashen not only has a fairly unique art style for the game, they also have a unique playstyle that focuses around the destruction of field spells. It came at a perfect time to take advantage of several meta decks that ran devastatingly powerful field spells, and then its board wipe cards and decent super poly targets made me think there might be something there. But the cards were simply too dogshit. They could barely even do their primary combo half the time because they split the deck up into 2 separate archetypes that couldn't search each other half the time. God, what a frustrating thing that I still would like to see OCG fix for us someday, as they have with several other TCG exclusives. Maybe someday we will finally have the Vados hand trap format that people predicted when that card was announced. Number 6, Ragnara. Ragnara is a deck that I was so fucking right about, and that is part of why I like it so much. I told everyone that the cards seemed fine, but not good enough, having the same problems as the very power-crept Tri-Brigade. It's very good at doing what it does, but what it does is lock you into doing almost nothing. And that's why Ragnara has not performed to nearly the degree that everyone in my comments incorrectly said it would. People say I'm wrong so often in my React videos, it's very nice to remind you that I do get things right pretty often. Not every time, certainly, but a lot more than you all seem to think. That satisfaction alone is plenty enough to include this on my list, but it's also a really cool engine that brings together several typings with a lot of power behind them. If Ragnara had provided them with some more impactful endboard pieces, or if some get printed in the near future, this deck could do some very cool things. Ogdoadic and Plantlink engines have so much potential to really blow the roof off the deck if they just raise the ceiling to a point that was actually worth blowing off. Number 5, Yubel. Yubel is yet another old-ass card that wasn't exactly an archetype that was given a whole wave of support last year to make it actually playable. And these cards did a ton of work to that end. Yubel went from famously unplayable to a top-tier meta threat in the span of a couple of waves of support. The Yubel cards were so pushed that Konami had to limit opening of the Spirit Gate since they weren't quite ready to hit Phantom of Yubel yet. They still had a little bit more money to squeeze from that card, you see. Look, after they hit OSS during the tournaments where Snake Eyes barely converted into Top Cut, I am now fully convinced that any hit you see is not actually about balance, but is the product of a Konami bean counter determining the exact optimal way to get people to purchase product. Before that, I thought it was only like half of the decision-making process. Funnily enough though, I'm really not sure if the way we ended up playing Yubel was really how Konami expected us to play them. Sure, they wanted us to pop Yubels to get more Yubels, but did they want us to do it so many times per turn? Did they want us to use them to link spam? I don't think so. I think they intended for us to sit on Ultimate Nightmare, Phantom, and the Lotus with Super Poly and Super Poly at home set in the back row. Luckily, players in the OCG and TCG found ways to turn the deck into a much more interesting link spam deck, especially with the addition of the Fiendsmith and the honorary Fiendsmith Closed Moon. Despite being on a similar power level to the contemporary Snake Eyes Fiendsmith for a similar length of time, I never really heard the hate for this deck to the same level. Everyone seemed to be a bit too bemused by the presence of Yubel of all things in the metagame to be all that mad about it. And that's generally where I land on it, especially after limiting Phantom. It's too funny that Yubel went from 0 to hero to get all that upset. Number 4. Primite. Primite is an actual new original archetype that was released this year, but is also the ultimate legacy support. This quite powerful engine gives just about any deck forced to lug around a dogshit normal monster to make the deck work a significant boost to their consistency and endboard. Since there are so many decks shackled to a terrible vanilla, this is such a cool set of cards, able to boost up the power of so many decks while not boosting the best decks in the room as well as Fiendsmith does. And none of this is to mention that these guys look cool as hell. They're apparently retrains of the Luster Dragons, which were some of my favorite cards as a kid. I just love dragons with gemstones embedded in them. I was also obsessed with Hyozan Ryu, just to drive that point home a little further. The Primites take the promise of those design elements and turns it into actual playable cards. It's really exciting just how many cool ways you can use these cards, especially with the new wave coming next year to make it even better. Number 3, Malice. Alright, let's go down the rabbit hole of one of the current best decks in the room. As one of my top 10 favorite archetype aesthetics from the first one of these top 10 videos, Malice was of course going to be near the top of the list, especially with how sparse the choices are for last year. To reiterate though, Malice is such a genius concept for a Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Alice in Wonderland is such an enduring story for literally nothing to do with the actual story itself, which no one cares about, but for the psychedelic aesthetics. These aesthetics have been remixed and reinterpreted in about 5 million ways, and Konami went and found a new and interesting way to do so. Turning the psychedelic imagery into a Snow Crash-esque virtual world and all the characters into cyberpunk hackers and malware is a really neat way to freshen up an aesthetic that has been worn thin by a million Hot Topic alt-styled reimaginings. Thank you, Tim Burton. Not that cyberpunk isn't overdone quite a bit in our modern age, thank you CD Projekt Red, but we hadn't smashed it together with Alice in Wonderland yet, and it works pretty well, especially with a good forced pun like the Mad Hacker. It's actually really cool that they tease this archetype before making it in full with a random pack filler card, by the way. If we must have pack filler, this is the way to do it in my opinion. The fits that they designed for these girls are so peak too, I absolutely adore them. These fashion choices are absolutely stellar. It's also incredible that they're so strong after only one wave of cards. Not every deck build archetype can say that. Number 2, Mimig Ghoul. Mimig Ghoul are also a favorite archetype aesthetic alumni, and a real achievement for this year. That's because it's the first TCG exclusive archetype in quite some time to actually be worth the cardboard it's printed on. A very unique playstyle drew a lot of people, including myself, in excitedly, although an equally unique weakness to Yubel Star, one of the most important cards in the meta at the time, made it feel doomed without a good second wave. And with so many promising first waves and disappointing second waves for TCG exclusives, one of which shows up on this very list, things weren't looking good. For the second wave, they originally showed us one card, and it's easily the worst card in the batch. Things were looking dire for these cute little mimics, but then they showed us the rest of the cards, and they were actually good. Like, not meta warping or anything, but a solid rogue deck that even has a top in a cool mashup build with Pearly. The Mimig Ghouls are such a flavorful archetype. The card design really gives the feeling of presenting a treasure chest to the opponent just to reveal it was a mimic all along and make them pay for their greed. A greed that they cannot avoid thanks to you forcing their hand. And they clearly went to the ghost trick school of making spooky things adorable, which you know I love. I'm so glad they decided to make these cards playable instead of doing an Ashen to an even cooler first wave. Number 1. Goblin Bikers. Goblin Biker is perhaps the most fun part of the Yubel lore besides maybe original Sinful Spoils. Yes, I'm still peeved that they banned it. While we all love the toxic Yuri between Yubel Star and Yubels and the cute little Poplar, everyone cheers when the Goblin Bikers go wild. I already have a soft spot for 3-axis, and these guys are the strongest 3-axis strategy yet, which I think is another aspect of their popularity. A lot of people enjoy 3-axis, in my experience. Although, I really do miss a lot of the old 3-axis tools that have been all thrown away for the new Goblin Bikers and the unlimited Terror Top. Yeah, not that I would ever complain about more Terror Top, of course. Nor would I the Goblin Bikers really, because these guys are a hoot and a holler, and one of the strongest anti-meta picks against Ixie's decks. These guys insta-kill Pearly and do well against ryu-ge, although not as well as you might think. It's a shame that they also happen to be Ixie's decks, making the mirror match a little sticky. But with card names like Big Gabunga and Goblin Bikers Gone Wild, and even better, Gone Bonkers, you're certain to get a smile out when you play this deck. That's the beauty of goblins, and why Magic has had them as a typing for so long, and why Yu-Gi-Oh has had them for a long time before making an actual goblin archetype. That's another beautiful piece of the Goblin Biker pie. It's not just an archetype of Goblin Bikers, it's the creation of an archetype for all previous Goblin cards, which really opens up a lot of fun synergies. The Goblin Bikers on basically every level are an absolute delight, and I'm happy to declare them my favorite archetype of 2024. You know, it's weird. I thought this list would be a bit easier than it turned out to be. Like a third of it is TCG exclusive archetypes, and even more of it is nostalgia bait cards turned into full archetypes instead of actual new archetypes. But all the other new archetypes I don't particularly care for. Like what, you want me to get excited for Tenpai or ryu-ge? It turns out there just weren't actually that many new archetypes this year. A lot of new stuff this year was legacy support, and most of the meta this year was just the same deck anyways. This feels insane, right? I don't know if this is a bad sign or if it's actually normal, I just never noticed it, or what. It's just strange, and it's made this video strange in a way, as a lot of it became complaining about decks I wish were good instead of talking about things I like. Not exactly what I started this series or this video specifically to do, but what can you do? Anyways, there you have it, my top 10 favorite archetypes of 2024. What do you think of all these choices? What would you include in your top 10? Let me know down below, rest well, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a nice year, and good night. Hey there, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've got a lot more for you if you want them. Just hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notifications. I'd also appreciate if you left me a like and a comment and maybe shared the video around with your friends. You can also follow me on all the usual social media sites. Just check out my website in the description below for more info. My videos are funded by my patrons and YouTube members, whose names you'll see scrolling by in these credits here. For just $1 a month, you too can find yourself here, trapped in my end screen for all eternity. In particular, I'd like to thank Haru Hayes, Fleakill, Frog Prince Michael, Jeremy Coatney, the Almighty Ferret Lord, and Fire Mizumi. A big thanks to all my other patrons and to my little community as a whole. Remember to be kind to yourselves, be kind to others, and have a wonderful whatever time it is for you. Bye-bye, sleep well.